All right, so we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take off from where we left off, something like that. And so we're now doing kind of 11 and 12. I've added in some text here, but this is basically what we were working on before. And you'll remember the last thing we did is we have this this Reddit subreddit Phoenix, and we're getting stuff from it, and we're using the subreddit stream submissions. We're going to do something slightly different this time, and what we're going to do is, instead of bringing it in a stream, we're going to use we're going to grab a list of all of a certain number of topics. So we're going to start with a topic list equals empty list. Remember, these brackets here mean that the list is actually empty. And we're kind of going to establish that because in a second we're going to append to that list. We're going to add on to that list. And you can't append to a list that doesn't exist. So we start off with just an empty list. And then, kind of like that line above, we're going to do a for loop in which we grab things. Now, this is slightly different. The first part looks the same for submission and subreddit. But instead of using a streaming object, we're going to be using the new object. To give you an idea of what that is, this is the subreddit we're pulling from. Here are the three ways you can organize things: hot, new, and top. You can look and see what the top is and the hot are, but new is basically a reverse chronological listing. So what this says is, let's find out what the last 7 things in this subreddit were. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to pull each of the 7 last submissions. We're going to do something super simple with that. We're going to take topic list, which is empty to start with. We're going to append it, that is, add something onto it. And what we're going to add in is the submission ID. Now, the submission ID is kind of like you can think of it as a license plate. It's a unique identifier for each submission on Reddit. You never see it if you're using Reddit. You probably never see it. But it's kind of a separate record for each one of those, so you can grab it easily without having to worry about all of the other things. So I've just run this and it ran quickly. Let's make sure that there's something there by looking at topic list. So what this has done is it has taken, started with an empty list, went through one by one for the first or the most recent 7 submissions to the subreddit, and it's looked for the ID for each of those, and it's put it in a list. There's a good reason for doing this. The reason is that we want to kind of run through these separately later on. So we're just kind of grabbing them first, and then we can go back through them. We have a list, so we know how to iterate over that list, right? We can just kind of say, for each of the topics in that list, for each topic in the topic list. So that means we're going to do this one, then this one, then this one, through all 7 of them. And then for each of those, this seems a little redundant, but we're going to grab the submission for each one of those. And we haven't used this method of that we have in the Reddit object before, but we're going to do submission equals reddit.submission each topic. We can actually grab an individual submission if we have the ID for it, which is why we have that list of IDs. So now we have this submission with all the pieces of the submission sitting there in that object, and we can do various things with it. What we're going to do is what we're trying to do overall is take these 7 objects and put them in a comma separated version file. So we're trying to put it into something that we can open up in Excel, for example. And we're going to do it a lazy way by just inserting the commas ourselves. There's actually a module in here that lets you output CSV files, but we're just doing it kind of the lazy way for now. Why comma separated? It's not a very good way of storing data at all. We'd be much better off to kind of take this and stick it in a database, something that we'll do later on, or store it in some other way. But for now, it's kind of a quick and dirty way to kind of have a record of these if we need to. So what we want to do is, for each time it goes through this loop, we want to create a line. And in that line, we want a bunch of data in different columns. Those columns are going to be separated by commas. So let's just kind of do something called line out. This is going to be a simple string, and in that we're going to start with the topic that we could get the ID. We could do submission ID. It'll get us the same thing if we do submission ID, but instead we're going to do each topic. It's the same exact thing, right? We just pulled it up from that. And then after that, we're going to insert a comma, as I said. Right. Within those marks. So there's the first part of the string is just this license plate number, this ID, plus a comma. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to add in lines after this by using the thing that we ran into before, which is that plus equals value. So remember, this one says don't just put this in there, but add this to whatever's already in there. So we're going to build this string little by little. So after the topic, we're going to do submission title. That's what we printed out up here, if you'll recall. It's the title of this particular submission, and then another comma. After that, we'll do a bunch of other stuff. I'm going to be lazy here and do the cooking show method, where I've already typed it out, so you don't have to watch me struggle with my keyboard for 5 minutes. Maybe. You still have to watch that, apparently. That Z does not belong there. There we go. All of this indentation is messed up. I'm not sure that was any faster. So what we've added here is that same line out plus equals each time. Plus equals the author, plus equals the day, the time it was created. Created UTC is going to be the universal time, the GMT time, in seconds since 1970. So it's something that actually we won't be able to read. We could use date time, which we've used before to use, string to date, and we could, or time to date, and we could change it over to the string value. But here we're just kind of going to do put it out as the regular old number of seconds. We can always convert it later. And then the last one we're going to do is the submission score. This is the number of upvotes minus the number of downvotes. And then at the very end, because we're going to be writing this out to a file, we need, remember, this N is a new line, not a comma in that last one, but a new line, which says we don't want to keep, when we write this out to the file, we don't want it to just be one single line that keeps going, because Excel or whatever spreadsheet application we're using won't know what to do with a very long line like that. We need it separated out line by line. And so this adds a new line to the end. For now, though, we won't put it out on a file. We'll just print it to see what it's looking like. Actually, when I write programs, I do a lot of this where I'm printing stuff out to make sure it is doing what I expected it to do. And let's go ahead and run that. All right. The squiggly lines mean we have an error. Let's see what it is. So it's a type error. And what it says is we're trying to add a whole object called Redditor to this string. And we can't add Redditor to the string. If you don't know Reddit, you might not know that Redditor just refers to a person using Reddit. But what it suggests here is this is actually a full object with a bunch of different attributes. And if we hit a period here, we'll get all the different attributes that it has. How many comments, what its lifetime comment karma is, when it was created, whether it's your friend, whether they have a verified email, whether they're an employee of Reddit. So we have like a whole bunch of stuff. But what we want was right up there, the name. So we want to figure out what the author's name is. So I'll put that there. So that should fix that. Another error. Again, we have a type error here, that this is a float. You'll remember a float is a number with a decimal value to it. So we'll just translate that over to, whoops, move that over and make it into a string so that we can put it in our string. And I'm going to not make you look at the next type error, which is going to be this, which is actually an integer. It's a number, the score. We're going to convert that over as well so we don't get another error. We'll go ahead and run it. And it gives us each of these items. Now this is a good time to, again, we're not doing 1,000 of them, we're just doing 7, but it gives us a sample to see whether this looks like it's working out pretty well. It seems like it's in pretty good shape. There's a comment, there's a comment, here's a comment, here's a comment, thanks. Here's a comment that has a comma in it. And that's going to be a problem because it's going to interpret this as two separate columns. And there's actually, the next one has a comma in it as well. So it's several commas in it. So it's not, this is something we probably have to do something about. And what we can do is, I happen to recognize that one thing we could do is we could put quotes around that, and that will kind of fix the problem. There's still another problem there, which is that is about what if there's quotes in the quotes, and that could be a mess. But for now, I'm going to ignore that. Later on, I might want to mess with it. This is why we don't write our own CSVs, why we use the module to do it. But again, I'm just being lazy and writing our own CSVs here, mostly so we can play with how we assemble lines of strings here like this. All right, so now we have it maybe working. I could run it, but you'll just have to trust me that it's actually putting those in there. What about writing it out to a file? Well, you'll remember that we use with. I'm going to do that on a separate line so you can see more easily. With open, let's call it subfile.csv. And we can open this. We're not going to do a read, right? Because we're going to be writing out to it. So we could open it with either an A for append, which would add to whatever's there, or we can open it with a W. I will warn you here that it's not going to be nice and ask you whether you want to overwrite something. It will just overwrite it. So be careful that's what you really want as your choice here, because if there's a file by that file name, subfile.csv, it's gone as soon as you do this. Keep backups. So we've opened this as a subfile. All of this, we're going to do all of this with that subfile open. So I'm just going to highlight it and hit tab, and that's going to move it over for us. So we say that we want to do all of this with subfile. And as well as writing it out to the screen, I'm going to go ahead and subfile.write line out. Now when I run it, hopefully I've done all of this the way I wanted it to. It's putting it out, and you'll see that there's now quotes around each of the titles, which should solve the comma problem. It doesn't solve the quote problem, but it solves the comma problem for now. And there's our 7 pushed out. And if I look over here, it's actually created this subfile, and I could download it and open it up in Excel and have all my data just sitting there, right? All right. But what if we want more than just the comments? What if we want more than the topics? What if we also want to get some of these comments as well, right? How do we get those? Well, before we do that, I want to do a quick note here that we need to be nice to Reddit. I don't remember what the exact number is, but you're only supposed to make requests to Reddit so many times a minute. I think it's something like 30 requests a minute, might be 60, might even be more than that. But we're in no particular rush, so we can kind of introduce some delay in here so that we're not getting in trouble. If you run over this, they'll block you. You'll get in trouble, and they won't let you use the API anymore because you're kind of abusing it. So what we're going to use is a function that I've just imported from Time called sleep. If I hit sleep 4 and I run it, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's done. We've made our computer less efficient. So I'm just going to put this in here so that we don't beat up on it too much. So each time I'm going to take a 2-second break just to give it a chance to breathe. It'll take a little longer that way, but we've got it. All right, so we've got it writing out each of the submissions now. What would we do if we wanted to go from that to figuring out how to get the comments? So for each of these is going to have comments, and we're going to kind of repeat what we've done up here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use a method here, which is going to replace more is the method. So what we're doing is we're asking it to, in this case, when you read it on Reddit, you'll come to a point in the comments where it says more, and you have to hit more and it'll load a whole bunch in, right? It's this infinite scroll thing where you just keep adding in new comments at the bottom, kind of this Ajax process where you kind of pull new ones in. You get that in Facebook and lots of sites now because there's just so many comments that you have to ask for more of them. This will say we want you to get all of them, right? We don't want you to have the mores in there. Otherwise, when we load the comments, we'll actually have a comment that says more, and we don't want that. So what we're going to say is, what this line does is it says replace the mores and just get me all of them. And then it's, instead of having to go through like we did up here, there's actually associated with the submission, we can do comment list. I could do comments, but I'll just do comment list equals submission comment list. What this gets me is a list of comment objects. Just like we had a submission object here, we now have a list of comment objects. And with those comment objects, we can kind of iterate through those comments and basically repeat what we've done above. So I'm gonna cheat here and say, well, I'll just pull this in real quick. So we're gonna do a quick for each of those comment objects in this list. And then we've used line out and then we've written it here, so we can reuse that again. We don't have to come up with a brand new variable just for that. So we'll do the sleep like we did before, and then we're going to have something that looks very much like what we had before, which is starting with line out with nothing in it. Let's see if we can get this to the right tab. It all needs to be lined up. Line out needs to be lined up. So we've got a sleep, and then we say we start with a blank line out. We're going to, in this case, we do need to have each comment.id because we don't know what the IDs are. And we want to do that. We're doing the quote again because I'll leave that for a second. I'll pull that and I'll show you in a second. We're doing a quote with that because we know that the body, in this case, the body is like the title, but it's the body of the comment. We know that it needs quote marks around it. We'll go ahead and add in a line out. You'll remember each comment dot author dot name. We won't forget the name this time. And then we'll do the straight quotes. Okay. Where we won't forget the string for doing the created UTC. So we can pull that in kind of as expected. Here. Oops. Here. Oops. Oops is the key function here. Lots of oopses. So again, I'm cheating by copying and pasting, although I don't know that that's saving me a lot of time. So we've got the created time. We've got the score like we did before. Make sure that stays lined up. And then we've got a couple here that we didn't have before. Let me explain what they are. We're going to add a couple more columns to the end. We're going to add in one that is each comment parent ID, and we're going to add in each topic. That's remember the license plate from up here. And the reason is this is all going in a separate file. So we need to be able to associate each of these comments with the submission that it came from, right? Because we just have a single set of lines with all the comments in it, and we want to be able to map it back to which it's located to. I don't know if we need to know this, the ID, parent ID, but if you look over here, you'll see for these comments that they're threaded. So this is the ID for this one is the root. It's the top. It's not responding to anyone, but this is replying to that one. This one's replying to that one, and this one's replying to that one. So we want to have, in case we need to go back and figure out who was replying to whom for context for whatever reason later on, we want to kind of say who's the parent ID so we can kind of network those back together again. So once we've got that all together, we can once again print the line out. I'm not going to do anything fancy to separate these out. You'll just kind of see them mixed together for now. Now, for now, we have it right now writing to a file here, but these are just going to write to the screen. We don't have it writing to a file quite yet. It's not happy. Attribute error, comment list, submission comment list. That is because it's not comments, comment, it is comments. Comment, where is it? For each comment in comments. Spelling matters. Little things matter. So submission comments list, not comment list, is the object. So now it's kind of going in. Now it's getting those comments as well and feeding those in there. Now, you'll see pretty quickly, the comments also have these kind of license plates, but then where's the license plate here? And the issue is that we have in the body of the comments, something we didn't have as a problem with the titles, is that it actually puts in, let's go ahead and stop that. It puts in the full returns, and that's going to mess up if we try to bring that into, if we actually write that out to a file and then try to bring it into Excel, that's not going to work at all. So what we're going to do is in these bodies, we're going to do a method called replace, and that's just replacing one string with another string. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace, remember how to get the new lines, it's a \n. We're going to replace the \n's, which is the new lines, with, well, we could replace it with just about anything. We could do something fancy like a pipe, but for now I'm just going to do, say, a slash. Now the problem with that is that there are also likely to be slashes in there, and that could become confusing. What matters here is whether those returns are actually important to you or if you're really just looking at the words. In this case, I think we're just looking at the words. So let's try that and see if it fixes our problem. Now we have them all line by line, which is what we want, right? Let's stop that. So what we're missing here is that we, remember, are writing this to a subfile. We've opened this and we're writing it out to a file. We want to write the comments out to a file as well. So we can actually just do a comma there and do open. We can do the same thing again here. This is not something you run into that often, but it works, so we'll do it. Open, call it com file, I guess. CSV, I can spell. And again, we have to determine whether we want to write or append this, and then we're going to, we're going to write it. And we're going to open it, grumble, as com file. And then we can just do, just as we did subfile right here, I'll copy that and bring it down here. We'll do a quick, make sure it's all the tabs are lined up, a com file here. So in this case, we're writing each of these comments out to the com file. Now remember what, this is a for within a for, so it's going to go through each of those, oops, I've erased them, but each of those 7 items. And then for each of those 7 items, it's going to do this other loop lots and lots of times to do all the comments and write them out. Let's go ahead and run that while we're thinking for a second. We have the sleeps in there, and we have the write outs. This should all be working the way we want it to work. And as you can see, it's pushing this out. We could get rid of at this point if we were pretty sure everything was working. We could get rid of the print, so it just kind of did it in the background. There are a few things that we might want to add to this. We might want to say, for example, limit the time period in which you're collecting. You have to decide how often you would be running this. You might want to do it for the 24-hour period before you ran it, so you could run it every day, for example. Uh-oh, we've run into an error while I'm talking. So if you look down here at the bottom, we've come to a point where it says none type. Object has no attribute name. So what it says is that there is no, this girl has no name. This user has no name. And the problem is that when you're a user on Reddit and you delete your account, it's going to have no author name. It disappears from the system. The comment stays there, but there's no author name. So what we're going to do is, instead of doing each, we're going to do this. We're going to pull it out and we're going to check to see if it is, if there is a name there. And so we're going to say if not. So what this does is it checks and says if there is no object called each comment author. In other words, if it's gone, if there's no each comment author there, we're going to just say name equals no name. So if there's no comment, if there's no author listed, we don't need a period there, that's silly. If there's no author there, then we'll call it, we'll set the variable name to no name. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and use the name that's listed there. So we'll say name is that, the thing that we knew before. So that's working for most of them. For 99.9% of the cases, it's going to make name into whatever's in that object. But if author does not exist, we need some kind of string to put here. And that string is going to be no name. And so now that we've, not gnome. Now that we've set that as name, we can drop it into our line and run it. So probably what you would do is set this up with dates on either side and then have it run every 24 hours, for example. And later on, we'll talk about how to do that with scheduling on a system so that you can kind of grab things periodically, for example. Or you might want to just run it where you say, I need the last 200. Or you might want to run it on demand. But you've got a kind of a program here that you can save off separately. It does not need to run in a notebook. You could actually save this in a separate file and just have it run directly from Python at that point. And it looks, I don't know how far we get along here. Note that it's picking up Unicode here. That may become an issue later on. It depending on how, for example, Excel, if you pull this into Excel, it may not be happy with the upside down smiley face, but Python's handling it fine and dropping it into a file fine. Okay, so that actually, we have a running program. We've done what we came to do with Python for now. We've set up a program, we've built it from scratch, we have something that seems to work. If you want to kind of go on beyond this, I'm going to ask you first to write your own program, a small version of this or something more extensive, just to kind of stretch your legs and show that you're capable of doing that. And then from there, we kind of dive into a bunch of different modules in the coming units where we kind of make use of various ways of saving data, of getting at data that's a little harder to get at, and then of starting to do some analysis of pulling out words and eventually teaching computers to understand those words or categorize them in various ways, visualize them in various ways. So we've got lots of little pieces here, but the core is going to remain the same. We're going to continue to kind of use Python to tease these things out. And each time we use it, we're going to kind of increase our vocabulary, increase the kinds of tricks of the trade we can use to manipulate the tools that we have, and hopefully kind of give you some fluency here where you feel comfortable enough to sit down and do something. Now, you probably look at this and say, how would I do this if I were not doing Reddit, if I hadn't just watched you do it? Some of it is just like cooking, right? You use this, you look at, see what I've done, and you tweak it slightly. But if you look out there, all of these have great tutorials for each of these modules. So if you look at these, and you can see I've looked at this one, that's why it's a different color. If you look at these, this looks quite a bit like what we've done. Actually, this is a bad example because if you look, we need to look at the latest version. And luckily it flagged it. Be careful that you're on the right version. But this is a bot that looks for questions and answers them. But like if you look at this, you have this piece which we used exactly. You have this getting the subreddit. You have getting the submission, the streamed submissions. So you can kind of go through the tutorials that people have written or look at examples of other people writing it, and then tweak those so that they work for you. And that honestly is the best way to kind of come to grips with new modules especially. And then from there, you can also look at read the manuals. So for PRAW, for example, you'll see that there's a manual that lists out all of these things like the IDs and like the names and each of the objects and all the things you can get out of it. It explains what they are. And if you run into a problem, an error, for example, if you search for PRAW and the error you're getting, you're going to get an explanation for how other people have solved it, because you're never going to be the first person that has run into a problem with this. And you're not going to be the only novice user that has run into using these this way. So next we're going to talk a little bit about the projects that you'll do and explain them a bit. But let's go back and make sure this is all happy and we haven't run into any problems. It looks like it's doing well. We're going to, it actually did well. It's all done. It's written those two files. And so we have a working program to kind of close us off on for Unit 1.